Michael Everett stood in front of the mirror in his luxurious bathroom, scrutinizing his reflection. His fingers lightly touched his smoothly shaven chin as he contemplated the evening ahead. Today was no ordinary day. Today was the day of his triumph, the day he was to celebrate his success in front of the cream of New York society. But something was bothering him, some vague premonition that he couldn't ignore. "Michael, are you ready?" came the voice of his assistant, Sarah Chen, from behind the door. He took a deep breath, adjusting his tie. "Yes, Sarah, coming in," he replied, opening the door. Sarah stood in front of him, holding a clipboard and looking as flawless as ever. Her dark hair was gathered in a severe bun and her eyes read worry. "Are you sure you want to do this?" she asked, lowering her voice. "This disguise, it's risky, Michael." Michael grinned, but there was no mirth in his eyes. "Risk is part of the game, Sarah. You know that better than anyone." He walked past her into his spacious office, where a set of waiter's clothes lay on the table. Sarah followed him, her heels clacking on the marble floor. "I understand your concern, but I need to know what's going on behind the scenes. The last few weeks. Something's not right. I can feel it." Sarah sighed, clearly disapproving of the plan, but knowing it was useless to argue. "Okay, but be careful. Jason might suspect something." At the mention of his best friend and CFO's name, Michael tensed. "Jason. Yeah, you have to be extra careful with him." "You think he might be involved in anything?" Sarah asked cautiously. Michael shook his head, his face grim. "I don't know, Sarah. I really don't know. But tonight, I intend to find out." He started to change into his waiter's suit, and Sarah turned away, giving him privacy. "Is the schedule for tonight ready?" Michael asked, buttoning his shirt. Sarah nodded, looking at the clipboard. "Yes, everything is on schedule. Guests will start arriving at 7 p.m. Dinner is at 8:30. Your speech is scheduled for 9:45. "Great," Michael said, putting on his waiter's jacket. "Now for the most important part. Which key people have confirmed their attendance?" Sarah began to list. Jason, of course. Viktor Kozlov. He flew in from Moscow specifically for this event. Emily Thornton. She said she was writing an article on the rising stars of the tech industry. Michael raised an eyebrow at the mention of Emily. "Interesting. We'll have to take a closer look at her." "Michael," Sarah said, and there was a warning in her voice. "Don't forget you're not there to flirt. You have a mission." He grinned. "Don't worry, Sarah. I'm mindful of my mission." Finished changing his clothes, Michael looked at himself in the mirror. The man who stared back at him looked completely different, a simple waiter who no one would notice amidst the noise and glitter of the party. "How do I look?" he asked, turning to Sarah. She gave him a critical look. Unrecognizable. "But Michael, for the last time, are you sure?" He nodded, his face turning serious. "Absolutely. Something's going on in my company, Sarah. Someone is playing against me, and I need to find out who it is." Sarah walked over to him and adjusted his bow tie. "Be careful. And remember, I'm always on call. If anything goes wrong, contact me immediately." Michael smiled, grateful for her support. "Thank you, Sarah. I don't know what I'd do without you." "Probably would have gone broke a long time ago," she joked, but there was genuine concern in her eyes. Michael picked up his phone and tucked it into the inside pocket of his jacket. "Okay, time to go. The show's starting." They left the office and headed for the elevator. As they descended, Michael could feel the adrenaline starting to pulse in his veins. Tonight could change everything, and he was ready to face whatever surprises awaited him. The luxurious room of the Ritz-Carlton Hotel was slowly filling up with guests. The clinking of champagne glasses mingled with soft conversations and laughter. Michael, in his waiter's suit, deftly maneuvered between the guests, holding a tray of drinks. "Champagne, sir?" he asked, approaching a tall man in an expensive suit. The man turned, and Michael recognized Viktor Kozlov, a Russian businessman of dubious reputation. Kozlov gave Michael an indifferent look and took the glass. "Thank you," he said in a strong accent before returning to his conversation with his companion. Michael stepped back, but remained close enough to hear their conversation. "So you're saying Everett doesn't know about the deal?" Kozlov's companion asked. Victor grinned. "Of course he doesn't. It's a surprise. A big surprise." Michael felt his heart beat faster. What kind of deal were we talking about, and why didn't he know about it? He moved on, offering drinks to the other guests and listening to the conversations. Most of the discussions were innocuous, the latest industry news, celebrity gossip, exchanging compliments on outfits. But Michael sensed that something more was lurking behind that idle facade. Suddenly he spotted Jason, his best friend and CFO. Jason looked tense, his eyes scanning the room restlessly. Michael headed towards him, trying to look as inconspicuous as possible. "Champagne, sir?" he offered. Jason absent-mindedly took the glass without even glancing at Michael. "Thank you," he murmured, continuing to look around the room. At that moment, an elegant woman in a red dress approached Jason. Michael recognized her as Emily Thornton, a journalist. "Mr. Foster," she said with a smile, "I'm Emily Thornton from the New York Times. May I ask you a few questions about Mr. Everett's company?" Jason visibly tensed. "Miss Thornton, this isn't a good time." "Oh, I'm sure you'll have a moment," Emily insisted. "For example, what can you tell me about the rumors of an impending takeover?" Michael nearly dropped the tray. "A takeover? What is she talking about?" Jason turned pale. "Yeah, I don't know what you're talking about. I'm sorry, I have to go." He quickly walked away, leaving Emily with a perplexed expression on her face. Michael wanted to follow him, but at that moment Sarah walked up to him. "We have a problem," she whispered. "It seems the real waiter you're replacing has shown up. We need to act fast." Michael nodded, his mind working feverishly. "Okay, I'll deal with it in a moment. But Sarah, there's something going on here. I've heard talk of some kind of deal and takeover." Sarah's eyes widened. "What? But that's impossible. We'd know." "Obviously not," Michael said grimly. "I need more information. Stall the real waiter. I'll keep scouting." Sarah nodded and quickly withdrew. Michael took a deep breath and returned to his role, inwardly preparing himself for the possibility that the evening might take a completely unexpected turn. As he continued to circle the room, offering drinks and appetizers, his ears caught scraps of conversation. Most of the guests were discussing the usual mundane topics, but occasionally a hint of something more would slip through. "Have you heard about Everett's new project?" came to him. "Yes, they say it's something revolutionary." "But will he be able to retain control? I hear the shareholders aren't happy." Michael frowned. Shareholders aren't happy? Why didn't he know anything about that? Suddenly he spotted Jason, who was quickly making his way through the crowd toward the exit of the hall. Without thinking, Michael followed him, trying to remain unnoticed. Jason stepped out into the hallway and, glancing around to make sure no one was following him, pulled out his cell phone. Michael lurked around the corner, straining his hearing. "Yeah, it's me," Jason spoke in a low voice. "No, he doesn't suspect anything. Yes, everything's set for tomorrow. The Goatmen are on board, the rest of us too. By the end of the week, the company will be ours." Michael felt the blood freeze in his veins. His best friend, the man he trusted the most, was planning to take over his company. He was so shocked he didn't notice Emily Thornton appear from around the corner. "Oh, I'm sorry," she said, bumping into him. Then she took a closer look. "Wait, Mr. Everett? Is that you?" Michael froze, not knowing what to do. His cover had been blown, and at the most inopportune moment. "Miss Thornton," he began, frantically thinking of how to get out of this situation. "I can explain—" But before he could say anything, Jason appeared from around the corner. When he saw Michael in his waiter's suit, he turned pale. "Michael, what are you doing?" The three men froze in the hallway, looking at each other with a mixture of shock and disbelief. The tension in the air was so thick it seemed like it could have been cut with a knife. Michael was the first to break the silence, his voice low and controlled despite the storm of emotion inside. "I think we all need to talk, but not here." Jason, still pale, nodded. "My office, now." Emily opened her mouth to say something, but Michael beat her to it. "Miss Thornton, I realize you have a lot of questions, but I beg of you, give us an hour. After that, I will answer all of your questions, exclusively." The journalist's eyes lit up at the word exclusively, but she hesitated. "1 hour, Mr. Everett, not a minute more." Michael nodded, and Emily reluctantly withdrew. As soon as she was out of sight, Michael turned to Jason, his eyes burning with restrained fury. "Let's go," he said briefly, heading for the elevators. Jason followed silently behind him. The elevator ride to Jason's office passed in oppressive silence. As soon as the office door closed behind them, Michael ripped off his bow tie and turned to his former friend. "Explain yourself," he demanded. Jason sank heavily into his chair, suddenly looking very tired. "Michael, you don't understand." "Then explain it to me," Michael bellowed. "Explain why my best friend, the man I trusted with my life, is planning to steal my company." Jason flinched at his words. "This isn't stealing, Michael. It's a rescue." Michael stared at him, not believing his ears. "Salvation? What are you talking about?" Jason took a deep breath. "The company is in trouble, Michael. Bigger than you can imagine." "What?" "But our metrics—" "Fake," Jason said quietly. "Have been for over a year now." Michael felt the ground go from under his feet. He sank into the chair across from Jason, his world crumbling around him. "How? Why?" he asked, his voice barely audible. Jason ran a hand through his hair, clearly struggling with himself. "It started with a small miscalculation. I thought I could fix it before anyone noticed, but then new problems came up, and it got out of control." Michael stared at the man in front of him, not recognizing him. "Why didn't you tell me?" "I wanted to protect you, Michael. You were so enthusiastic about your new projects, so full of enthusiasm. I couldn't destroy your dream." "So instead you decided to steal the company?" Michael asked bitterly. Jason shook his head. "No, I was looking for a way out, and I found it in the person of Kozlov." "Kozlov?" Michael frowned. "That Russian businessman with the dubious reputation?" "He has the resources to save the company, Michael. He's willing to invest billions, but he wants a controlling interest." Michael felt the anger begin to rise in him again. "And you decided to give him my company without even consulting me." "I knew you'd never agree," Jason said quietly. "You'd rather go down with the ship than give it to someone else." "It's my decision, Jason, not yours." At that moment, the office door swung open and Sarah walked in, her face pale with anxiety. "Michael, thank goodness I found you. We're in trouble. Kozlov. He's putting together a press conference. Right now, downstairs." Michael jumped to his feet. "What? Why?" Sarah shook her head. "I don't know, but it doesn't bode well." Michael turned to Jason, his eyes burning with determination. "We're not done yet. Now let's get going. We need to stop this madness." The three quickly left the office and headed for the elevators. On the way, Michael turned to Sarah. "Sarah, I need you to find our lawyers, all of them. Tell them it's an emergency." Sarah nodded and pulled out her cell phone, quickly dialing numbers. As they entered the elevator, Michael turned to Jason. "Are you with me or against me?" Jason looked torn with contradictions, but then nodded decisively. "With you, Michael. Always with you." The elevator began to descend, and Michael could feel the adrenaline pulsing through his veins. He didn't know what awaited him downstairs, but he was ready to fight for his company to the last man. The elevator doors opened and Michael, still dressed as a waiter, stepped out into the hotel lobby. The scene unfolding before him made his heart clench. Viktor Kozlov stood before a group of journalists, his face shining with a triumphant smile. "And so, I am pleased to announce that Everett Technologies will now become part of Kozlov Industries," Kozlov was saying, his accent giving his words a special weight. Michael felt anger rising within him. Without thinking, he stepped forward, shoving the reporters away. "I apologize, but this statement is premature," he said loudly, drawing everyone's attention. Kozlov turned around, his eyes widening in surprise as he recognized Michael despite the waiter's suit. "Mr. Everett?" he uttered, clearly confused. "What does that mean?" Michael smiled, but his eyes remained cold. "It means, Mr. Kozlov, that you're trying to sell the skin of an unkilled bear. Everett Technologies is not for sale." Journalists murmured and cameras clicked, capturing the unexpected scene. Emily Thornton pushed forward, her eyes burning with excitement. "Mr. Everett, can you comment on your attire? And what do you have to say about Mr. Kozlov's statement?" Michael thought for a moment, then decided to point a bank. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for my appearance. I decided to conduct a little experiment today to better understand the workings of each member of our team. But that's not the main thing. The important thing is that Everett Technologies is not for sale and will not be sold. Mr. Kozlov, I'm afraid you've been misled." Kozlov turned purple with anger. "That's impossible. I have an agreement." "I'm afraid you don't," came a voice from behind Michael. It was Jason, his face pale but determined. I've made a mistake. There is no agreement and there never was." Michael felt a surge of gratitude for his friend, despite everything that had happened. He turned to the reporters. "Ladies and gentlemen, I realize you have many questions, and I will answer them all. But first I must deal with the inner workings of the company. Please give us some time." Emily Thornton stepped forward. "Mr. Everett, you promised me an exclusive interview." Michael nodded. "And you will get it, Miss Thornton. Tomorrow morning. I promise it will be worth the wait." With those words, he turned to Kozlov, who was still standing, stunned by what was happening. "Mr. Kozlov, I think we need to talk. In private." Kozlov reluctantly nodded, and together they headed toward one of the hotel's conference rooms. Jason and Sarah followed them. Once the doors closed, cutting them off from the hustle and bustle, Michael turned to Kozlov. "So, let's be honest. What exactly did Jason promise you?" Kozlov seemed to have recovered from his initial shock and now looked furious. "He offered me a controlling interest in exchange for an investment, said the company was on the verge of bankruptcy." Michael turned to Jason, his gaze heavy. "Is that true?" Jason lowered his eyes. "Yes, but I exaggerated the situation. We're in a tough spot, but we're not on the verge of bankruptcy." Michael took a deep breath, trying to gather his thoughts. "Okay, here's what we'll do. Mr. Kozlov, I apologize for this misunderstanding. We are indeed interested in the investment, but not in exchange for a controlling stake. If you're still interested, we can discuss other options for cooperation." Kozlov squinted his eyes. "And if I'm not interested?" "Then we'll part like ships at sea," Michael said firmly. "But I'd think twice if I were you. Our company still has tremendous potential." Kozlov studied Michael for a while, then nodded slowly. "All right, I'm willing to listen to your suggestions. But not today. I need time to rethink the situation." "I understand," Michael said. "Let's meet tomorrow at my office, say 2 o'clock in the afternoon?" Kozlov agreed and left the room, leaving Michael alone with Jason and Sarah. As soon as the door closed, Michael sank into a chair, suddenly feeling incredibly tired. "Sarah," he said without looking up, "can you give Jason and I some privacy?" Sarah nodded and walked out, casting concerned glances at both men. There was a long pause. Michael finally raised his eyes to Jason, who stood with his shoulders slumped, clearly expecting the worst. "Why?" Michael asked quietly. "Why didn't you come to me when things started to get out of control?" Jason sighed heavily and sank into the chair across from Michael. I was afraid. Afraid of letting you down, afraid of disappointing you. You were always so confident, so successful, and I felt like I was drowning." Michael shook his head. "Jason, we're friends, more than friends. We're partners. We have to trust each other, especially in hard times." Jason nodded, his eyes filling with tears. "I know, and I'm so sorry, Michael. I messed up." Michael looked at his friend with a long, appraising stare. Years of friendship, of working together, of shared triumphs and defeats flashed before his eyes. He remembered how they had founded the company together, how they had worked nights on end, dreaming of changing the world. And now it was all threatened by fear and mistrust. "Jason," Michael finally said, his voice quiet but firm, "I'm not going to lie. You really messed up. You let me down. You let the company down. You let all of our employees down. But—" Jason looked up, his eyes reading a mixture of fear and hope. "But you're my friend," Michael continued. "And I know you weren't acting out of malice. You were trying to protect the company, albeit in the wrong way. So I'm willing to give you a chance to make things right." Jason's eyes widened in surprise. "Really? After everything I've done?" Michael nodded. "Yes, but on one condition: complete transparency. From now on, you tell me everything. Every figure, every decision, every problem, no secrets. Do you understand?" Jason nodded vigorously. "Yes, of course I do. I swear it, Michael. No more secrets." "Good," Michael said, standing up. "Then we'll start right now. Tell me everything. I want to know every detail of our financial situation." The next few hours flew by like a blur. Jason, as if cleansing himself of a load of lies, laid out all the information, the real numbers, the troubled projects, the risky decisions. Michael listened, asked questions, took notes. The picture that emerged was far from perfect, but it was not as catastrophic as Jason had originally imagined. As the first rays of sunlight began to break through the windows of the conference room, Michael leaned back in his chair, rubbing his tired eyes. "Okay," he said, "the situation is difficult, but not hopeless. We need a plan." At that moment there was a cautious knock on the door. It was Sarah, looking tired but collected. "Sorry to interrupt," she said as she entered the room, "but we have a new problem. Emily Thornton is waiting for her promised interview, and our shareholders are demanding an explanation after yesterday's incident with Kozlov." Michael sighed. "Of course, how could I forget? Sarah, can you organize a press conference for 10 in the morning and get the board of directors together for 2 p.m.? Sarah nodded and stepped out to do the organizing. Michael turned to Jason. "We have about 3 hours to strategize. We need to be honest with our shareholders and the public, but at the same time, not cause panic." Jason nodded. "I'll prepare all the financial reports. Maybe if we show that we recognize the problems and are already working on solutions." "That's a good idea," Michael agreed. "But we also need something positive, something to show that the company has a future." Suddenly Jason's eyes lit up. "Project Phoenix, Michael, we can use it." Michael frowned. "Project Phoenix? I thought we froze it due to lack of funding." "Yeah, but the basic work is already done," Jason said excitedly. "If we can find an investor—" "Michael, this could be exactly what we need." Michael hesitated for a moment. Project Phoenix was an ambitious attempt to create a revolutionary artificial intelligence system for medical diagnosis. If it succeeded, it could be a complete game changer for the company. "You're right," Michael said slowly. "It's risky, but it could work. All right, let's prepare a presentation on Phoenix, but be prepared that we'll have to answer tough questions." The next few hours flew by like a blink of an eye. Michael and Jason worked side by side, preparing presentations, discussing strategy, rehearsing answers to potential questions. Despite the fatigue and stress, Michael felt a familiar sense of excitement and determination return to him. They faced a major challenge, but now that they were working together again, he believed they could overcome it. At 9:45, Sarah reappeared in the conference room. "The press conference is ready," she announced. "The reporters are already gathering in the main hall. Emily Thornton is pushing for an exclusive interview before the main conference." Michael nodded. "Okay, I'll meet with her now. Jason, are you ready?" Jason took a deep breath and nodded. "Ready. Whatever happens, we'll get through this together." Michael smiled and put his hand on his friend's shoulder. "Together," he affirmed. They left the conference room and headed toward the room where Emily Thornton was waiting for them. Before entering, Michael stopped and turned to Jason and Sarah. "Whatever happens today," he said quietly, "I want you to know, I'm grateful to both of you. We've been through a lot together, and I'm sure that together we can overcome this challenge as well." Sarah smiled, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. Jason just nodded, but there was a deep gratitude in his gaze. Michael took a deep breath, squared his shoulders, and opened the door. Emily Thornton was sitting at her desk, her laptop open and pen at the ready. When Michael entered the room, she looked up, and her gaze was sharp and inquisitive. "Mr. Everett," she said as she stood up, "thank you for agreeing to this interview. I have many questions." Michael nodded, sitting down across from her. "I understand, Miss Thornton, and I'm willing to answer all of your questions as honestly as I can." Emily turned on the recorder and leaned forward. "Okay, let's start with the most obvious. What happened yesterday? Why were you dressed as a waiter, and what's really going on with your company?" Michael took a deep breath. This was the moment of truth. What he would say now could either save the company or ruin it completely. "Miss Thornton," he began, "yesterday's events were the result of a series of misunderstandings and communication errors. I decided to put on a waiter's costume in order to better understand the work of each member of our team. It was an unorthodox decision, I admit, but it allowed me to see things from a new perspective." Emily squinted her eyes. "What about Mr. Kozlov's announcement to buy your company?" "That was a premature announcement based on preliminary negotiations that were conducted without my knowledge," Michael answered honestly. "Mr. Kozlov is indeed interested in investing in our company, but a sale is out of the question." "But why was there a need for such a large investment in the first place?" Emily insisted. "Your company is considered one of the most successful in the technology sector." Michael closed his eyes for a moment, gathering his thoughts. When he opened them again, his gaze was firm and determined. "Miss Thornton, I won't lie to you or our shareholders. The last year has been a difficult one for Everett Technologies. We have faced a number of financial difficulties caused by a combination of factors, from failed investments to delays in the development of key projects. We made mistakes in management and communication, and as CEO of the company, I take full responsibility for that." Emily took notes quickly, her eyes burning with sensationalized material. "Are you talking about possible bankruptcy?" Michael shook his head. "No, the situation is not that critical, but we are at a crossroads, and today I'm ready to present our exit strategy." "And what is that strategy?" asked Emily. Michael smiled. "It's a combination of tough cost optimization measures and bold investments in innovation. In particular, we're ready to announce Project Phoenix, a revolutionary artificial intelligence system for medical diagnostics that could change the future of healthcare." Emily's eyes widened. "That sounds ambitious, but where will you get the funds for such a project from, given your financial constraints?" "We're in talks with a number of investors, including Mr. Kozlov," Michael replied. "But more importantly, we're reorganizing our management structure to provide greater transparency and efficiency. I will personally be more involved in day-to-day operations to make sure we're moving in the right direction." The interview continued for another half hour or so. Emily asked pointed questions, but Michael answered honestly and openly, not shying away from difficult topics. When they were done, Emily turned off the recorder and looked at Michael with renewed respect. "Thank you for your candor, Mr. Everett," she said. "It's a rarity in today's business." Michael nodded. "I believe honesty is the best policy, especially in difficult times." When Emily left, Michael allowed himself a moment to gather his thoughts. The first test had been passed, but there was more ahead of them. Sarah glanced into the room. "The press conference starts in 5 minutes. Are you ready?" Michael stood up, squaring his shoulders. "Ready. Let's do this." The main room of the hotel was filled with reporters and photographers. Cameras clicked as Michael stepped to the podium, Jason and Sarah standing behind him. "Good morning," Michael began, his voice firm and confident. "Thank you for coming in. I know you have a lot of questions after yesterday's events, and I'm here to answer them. But first, I'd like to make a statement." He paused, circling the room with his gaze. Every face was turned toward him, awaiting his words. He felt the gravity of the moment, realizing that the next few minutes could determine the fate of his company and career. "Everett Technologies is at a crossroads," he began. "Over the past year, we have faced a number of challenges that have jeopardized our financial well-being and reputation. I won't deny that or try to downplay the severity of the situation. We have made mistakes, and as CEO of the company, I take full responsibility for them." A whisper drifted through the room, and Michael noticed some of the reporters starting to scribble feverishly in their notebooks. "But I also want you to know, we're not giving up. Everett Technologies has always been a company that strives to innovate, that isn't afraid to take risks for progress. And today, we're willing to take that risk again." He paused, feeling the tension in the room build. "Today, I am pleased to announce Project Phoenix, our most ambitious initiative to date. It is a revolutionary artificial intelligence system for medical diagnostics that has the potential to change the future of healthcare. We believe that Phoenix will not only lead our company out of crisis, but also bring real benefits to millions of people around the world." The reporters began to whisper, and Michael saw some of them raise their hands, ready to ask questions. But he wasn't done yet. "I realize that many of you have doubts. How can we fund such an ambitious project given our current difficulties? It's a fair question. We are in talks with a number of potential investors, including Mr. Viktor Kozlov, whose announcement yesterday caused such a stir." Michael noticed Kozlov, seated in the front row, nodding slightly. "But investment is only part of the solution. We are also undertaking a major reorganization of our management structure to ensure greater transparency and efficiency. I'll personally be more involved in day-to-day operations to ensure that every decision, every dollar works to the benefit of the company and our shareholders." Michael took a deep breath as he prepared for the final part of his speech. "I know that many of you are wondering about my appearance in a waiter's suit yesterday. It was an unorthodox decision, I admit, but it allowed me to see our company from a new perspective, to understand the challenges our employees face at all levels, and it's an experience I won't forget." He looked around the room, meeting the reporters' eyes. "Ladies and gentlemen, Everett Technologies is going through some tough times, but we don't run from our problems. We face them head-on. We are learning from our mistakes and growing stronger. And with your support, with the support of our employees, shareholders, and partners, we won't just survive, we'll thrive." Michael paused, letting his words hang in the air. "And now I'm ready to take your questions." The hall exploded. Dozens of hands went up in the air. Reporters shouted their questions, trying to outshout each other. Michael raised his hand, calling for silence, and pointed to a journalist in the front row. "Mr. Everett," the journalist began, You speak of financial difficulties and management mistakes. Can you be specific about the amounts in question? How close the company came to bankruptcy? Michael nodded, expecting that question. That's a good question. I won't give specific numbers as it may affect our current negotiations with investors, but I can tell you that our financial difficulties are serious, though not catastrophic. We're not on the verge of bankruptcy, but without decisive action, we could find ourselves in that situation within the next year. He pointed to another journalist. Project Phoenix sounds ambitious, but also risky. How do you plan to convince investors and shareholders of its viability? Another great question, Michael replied. Project Phoenix is indeed ambitious, but it's based on years of research and development. We've already made significant progress on the prototype, and preliminary tests are showing promising results. We plan to organize a demonstration of the technology for key investors and members of the medical community in the coming weeks. Michael continued to answer questions for the next hour. The reporters were persistent, asking pointed questions about the company's financial situation, restructuring plans, and potential layoffs. Michael answered honestly and directly, not dodging difficult topics, but also not revealing information that could harm the ongoing negotiations. As the press conference drew to a close, Michael felt squeezed like a lemon, but also strangely encouraged. He had done his best to present the situation honestly, but also inspire hope and confidence. As he left the podium, he noticed Kozlov rise from his seat and head for the exit. Their eyes met, and the Russian businessman nodded slightly before leaving the room. Michael wasn't sure how to interpret the gesture, but he hoped it was a good sign. Sarah and Jason joined him as he came down from the podium. "You were great," Sarah said, her eyes shining with pride. Jason nodded in agreement. "You said all the right things, Michael. Honest, but hopeful." Michael smiled weakly. "Thanks, guys. But this is just the beginning. We've got a lot more work to do." "The board meets in an hour," Sarah reminded him. "We need to get ready." Michael nodded. "Yes, this will be just as important as the press conference." "Jason, are you ready to present a detailed financial report?" Jason straightened, his face serious. "Yes, I've prepared everything. Every figure, every project, full transparency, just as we agreed." "Good," Michael said. "Then let's have lunch and get ready for the meeting. We have a chance to make things right and we can't blow it." They headed toward the exit of the hall, but a voice stopped them. "Mr. Everett?" Michael turned around and saw Emily Thornton rushing toward them. "Miss Thornton," he said, "I hope the press conference was informative for you." Emily nodded, her eyes burning with professional excitement. "Very much so, but I have one more question if you don't mind." Michael sighed but nodded. "Sure, go ahead and ask." "You talked about reorganizing management and being more transparent," Emily began. "But you didn't mention possible changes in the company's leadership. Are you planning any reshuffling of top management?" Michael felt Jason tense beside him. It was a difficult question, and the answer could have serious consequences. "Miss Thornton," Michael began cautiously, "any change in the management of the company is a major decision that requires careful thought and discussion with the board of directors. At this time, I'm not prepared to comment on any potential reshuffling. Our focus now is on stabilizing the company's financial position and developing the Phoenix project. As soon as we have concrete decisions on the management structure, we'll be sure to make an announcement." Emily nodded, making notes in her notebook. "Thank you, Mr. Everett. One more question, if I may. Do you think you can regain investor and market confidence after this crisis?" Michael thought for a moment, then replied, "Restoring trust is a process that takes time and consistent action. We started that process today by honestly acknowledging our challenges and presenting a plan to address them. But this is just the beginning. In the coming weeks and months, We will prove our trustworthiness and capacity through concrete actions and results. I believe that if we are consistent in our efforts and transparent in our actions, we can not only rebuild trust, but build it." Emily smiled, clearly pleased with the answer. "Thank you, Mr. Everett. Good luck to you." As the reporter left, Michael turned to his co-workers. "Okay, let's get ready for the board meeting. We have a lot of work ahead of us." They headed for the elevators, each immersed in their own thoughts. Michael felt a mixture of fatigue and determination. The day had been long and stressful, but this was just the beginning. There were new challenges ahead of them, but now he had the confidence that together they could overcome any obstacles. The conference room on the top floor of the Everett Technologies building was filled with a tense atmosphere of anticipation. The board members, dressed in smart suits, sat around a long mahogany table, their faces serious and focused. Michael, Jason, and Sarah entered the room at exactly 2 p.m., feeling the stares on their faces. Michael took his seat at the head of the table, Jason sat to his right, and Sarah to his left. He looked around at those present, noting the mixture of emotions on their faces, from obvious displeasure to restrained curiosity. "Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen," Michael began. "I appreciate you taking the time for this extraordinary meeting. I'm sure you all have many questions after the events of the last 24 hours, and we're here to answer them and present our plan of action." He paused, letting his words hang in the air, then continued. "But before we begin, I want to say this. I fully recognize the gravity of the situation our company finds itself in. I realize that my actions and decisions have led to a loss of trust on your part, and I am prepared to take responsibility for that. If, after today's meeting, you decide that the company needs a new CEO, I will accept that decision." A surprised whisper swept through the room. Some of the board members exchanged surprised glances. Michael felt Sarah tense slightly beside him, but continued. "However, before you make any decisions, I ask that you listen to our plan. A plan that I believe will not only lead Everett Technologies out of this crisis, but will also open up new horizons for us." Michael knew there were many challenges ahead of them. Project Phoenix was still a risky venture. Investor and public confidence had to be rebuilt, and competitors would surely try to capitalize on their temporary weakness. But now, looking at his loyal associates, he felt that they were ready for any challenge. With those words, they walked out of the conference room, ready to face a new day and new opportunities. The story of Everett Technologies was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning.